You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
There was a little bar in Mill Valley where all the Starfleet trainees used to go.
The 602 Club.
You know it.
I was there more times than I can remember.
Welcome to the 602 Club, coming at you with this supplemental deep in the muck and the mire of Corellia. I gotta say, Dryden was right. This place stinks. But what doesn't stink is that I'm here with my good friend and buddy, John Mills, as we're going to be diving into a Star Wars book called Most Wanted that is linked there. It's actually the tie-in novel, the lead-in novel for Solo, a Star Wars story. So, John, welcome back, man.
Thanks, man. I got back a lot quicker this time.
You did.
Yeah,
and I knew the way to your heart because you and I both really liked Solo.
Yes.
And during that conversation, we were talking about how much we wanted to see more of Kira.
Yeah.
And Han.
Yeah.
And so I knew if I dangled this in front of you like a I don't know, some sort of carrot. I don't know what a Star Wars carrot is.
A bantha steak.
A bantha steak.
Yeah,
there
let's just
you
go with that.
Or a glass of blue milk that you'd come running. So Corellian whiskey, we'll go with that. That's a little more refined.
Yeah, that works.
With a bantha steak.
Yes.
Okay. But we're before we dive into the book, super excited to have you guys here. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you find us all over the place. We're on iTunes, itunes.com/TrekFM. You can find all the shows we're doing there, and gosh, help out the show. Help other people find the 602 Club. Give us a star rating review. It really does help people find the show, and you'll get called out on the show if you give us any kind of review. So then you can find us on Twitter. Make sure you're following us there. Follow us. You can see everything that's coming out from the network. You can interact with the hosts from the network. It's a lot of fun. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. And we have the listeners-only discussion group over there on Facebook called the Babel Conference. 2 ways to get there. You can go to Facebook, type in the keyword Babel, you'll find it. Or if you're on our website at trek.fm, any of the show pages, you'll see a discussion button. Just hit that, and it'll bring you over there as well. And then you can talk to everybody else who's listening in on the network and the hosts about all the shows that we got coming out, specifically as you got here, the 602 Club. And then last but not least, trek.fm/contact, choose a show, choose the 602 Club, and that will allow you to send me and anybody else that's on that week an email if there's something that you want to talk to us about. And gosh, it's been a long time since we've gotten into emails, and I love getting them, so email us up, so that's a lot of fun. John, so Most Wanted is by Ray Carson.
Yes.
And like some of the other Star Wars movies that we've had, we've gotten an adult book, a young adult book, a middle grade book. So this is the young adult book. And so far, I think you'll agree with me that the young adult books have been pretty successful. I mean, we've had Lost Stars, we had Ahsoka, we had Rebel Rising, and now we've got Most Wanted in that list. And so I think, I just want to say right up front, I feel like people are doing themselves a disservice if they are skipping over these because they're like, oh, that's YA.
Yeah, I think that's true. I remember talking about it with Mike Schindler about it, where he asked a great question because I was talking about how people aren't paying attention to young adult books, and he said, what does that even mean anymore? And it's a great question because what does it even mean? I mean, if this thing is quote-unquote canon, if this is the story of these characters, well, then what does that appellation mean in any real sense? I mean, if you're a completist and you want to read everything that's quote-unquote canon, then you're sort of obligated to read this regardless of how they classify it in the bookstore.
Well, yeah, I mean, gosh, I forgot to mention, we had Leia, Princess of Alderaan by Claudia Gray.
It still blows my mind that that's qualified as young adult.
Yeah, me too. We did have, the Legends of Luke Skywalker book that I covered with Bruce Gibson, which was really interesting, talking about his adventures, before The Last Jedi and kind of in that 30-year time period, which really enjoyed some of those stories there. So all in all, I think you are, as a fan, just kind of doing yourself a disservice. You're missing some of these stories, especially I would point out one that really stands out beside Lost Stars, which is critically acclaimed by all fans, and critics alike. I think everybody loved that book. But for me personally, the one that has added the most to the film, I think, was Rebel Rising. I really appreciated the way that they filled in the time gap from when we have Jyn go with Saw to the point you see her in prison. That's a very long time, and they fill all of that in, and it does a very good job of giving it a better picture of Jyn and, of course, Saw's group and everything like that, what's going on. So, this, when we get to Most Wanted, it's looking to be able to do that same type of thing.
Yeah, I never got around to Rebel Rising, which I've been told numerous times is to my shame. But this book is fascinating to me, specifically because I don't. And the thing is, this is not a criticism or being dismissive. This is not. I don't think that this is a book that is vital to enjoying Solo. This isn't the sort of thing where I think that your understanding of the characters hinges on reading this book. I mean, the film is a failure if it is, sort of thing, from my perspective. However, this is a book where it does lend a lot of understanding and enrichment and, for lack of a better term, confirmation of reads that you get of the characters from the film. And what I mean by that is it basically confirmed things that I thought about these characters. And that's good because that means that very clearly this book was written with a definite purpose and a tremendous amount of skill put into it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, for me personally, when it comes to a tie-in book, what I want it to do is to enhance how I view a film, in the sense that while I watch it, I am then thinking about, well, I can see how, that the book now brings to life certain scenes or certain character moments, or like you were saying, confirms, certain things of reads that you had because of what happens here. And I feel like, in a lot of ways, we called it the expanded universe because it was expanding our knowledge of Star Wars. In a lot of ways, I think when these books do their job best, they expand what I thought of, say, Rogue One, or what now I think maybe of Solo, or, whichever film it is. And I think that's really, that's the key to me, because I finished this book and then I went and saw Solo again. And there were times where I was thinking to myself, oh man, that I like the way that works together, to create a fuller understanding, or just it enhances what my enjoyment of the film really. And I think, any tie-in book that can do that, to me, is a success.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a fine line to tread, because they can't put something in here that, that you can't enjoy the film without, it is a really fine line, because the author runs the risk of retreading something, or the author runs the risk of anything that might seem repetitive or slow you down. But, Ray Carson is gifted in the sense that she can take the characters and move them forward, put them in a place that makes sense, and then move them forward to a point where I don't feel that it doesn't feel like it needs to butt right up against Solo and be an opening right before it, say the way that that one James Luceno book before Episode 3 was supposed to
Catalyst.
function. No, not Rogue One. The one before Episode 3.
Yes.
Labyrinth of Evil.
Lair of Deception.
No, it was Labyrinth,
yeah, there you
Labyrinth
go.
of Evil was supposed to butt right up against Episode 3. And that was always sort of something that worked against it because it was like, well, you're sort of, limited with that. This has
Yes.
a little more room to breathe. And one of the insights I thought about the book that was very amazingly telling to me was, and I think something that resonated about the film Solo for me as well, is the fact that this confirms Han as the good guy, as somebody who's noble in spirit, no matter what else he tries to pretend to be. And what is extremely telling about that is you and I respond very well to that. Other people respond very well to that. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were people that don't respond well to it, because what was the one thing that people really disliked about changing Han's action in the original Star Wars was it took away his ruthlessness, his awfulness, if you will. And I think that a book like this is great because it very much establishes that baseline of how people will do things to survive, but they could still be good people inside.
Mm-hmm. I really like you mentioning that because, after seeing Solo, I went back and I watched Rogue One again, and then I watched A New Hope again, just to kind of see how these play out, because they all kind of play in a similar time period. And, I mean, I know Solo's 10 years before, but,
Yeah, sure.
But I was also interested to see how Solo would play with what we get of the character then in A New Hope. And one of the things I really liked there is that I felt like that there are seeds planted in this book, then there are seeds planted in Solo that lead us to get to that character who doesn't want to have anything to do with causes, because there's even a specific point in here where Han talks about causes only cause war and get people killed.
Right.
And he wants to be free of that. He just wants to be free. And I loved the way you kind of see that progression where he doesn't want to be tied down by some sort of cause. He just wants to be able to fly around in his ship with his buddy and enjoy life. That's his goal.
Right.
And, so when Luke or, Leia or anybody's talking about him in a cause in the first Star Wars film, it makes complete sense where this guy's like, no, I don't want any piece of that. I just want my money and I want to get out of here. But then you get that moment where he does come back and he saves Luke, and you're like, of course Han does, because that's who Han is. He's the good guy. He can't turn his back on these people when they need him the most.
Right. And I think that there's also, because there is something in this book specifically where Kira says that one of the things that, strikes her about Han and that she finds, I'm paraphrasing here, but finds attractive about him is every being they meet, Han treats them as a person. Han does not treat anybody dismissively. And I think that's such a beautiful thing because it speaks to the idea, again, of sort of that thread that Solo acts as, in a lot of ways, a prequel to The Force Awakens as much as to anything else, because you have that moment in Force Awakens where Finn says, you can understand that thing? And Han says, yeah, and that thing can understand you, so watch what you say. It really reinforces that whole thing of like how Han he's a true fan of judging people based on who they are, not in how he perceives them. And I love that because it makes his character so interesting, and it explains why somebody who drops his shipment of spice at the first sign of an Imperial boarding party, or somebody who screws up a double cross, or somebody who can get away with screwing over Conja Club twice. It takes 3 times. He's a guy who can read people, who can relate to people, and so they always want to give Han a break. They always want to let Han slide because
Jabba does.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that also speaks to his fatal character flaw, which is he's aware of that in a sense and takes that to the extreme. And you see it here as well, where he's willing to sacrifice any chance at becoming, the quote unquote, the head scrumrat, because he's able to say, it deserves it for Kira, but by him throwing himself away, he can leverage any positivity that he has to screw over Rebolt. And I think that's just such a...
Right.
Like, he does understand how to turn a situation into a positive for somebody.
Well, and I love that, too, like you bringing that up, and it's definitely the very end of the book, but, I mean, we're in full spoiler territory, as people know when we're talking about these kind of things, which is he's also doing it because that's what he knows Kira needs to be able to come up with her plan for them to escape, you know? And so he's found this very clever way to utilize every tool in his shed at that point to make sure that, she is where she needs to be so that they can then escape. And again, what it comes down to is, Han in this book says having one person in the galaxy to fly with, somebody you trust to have your back. Like, that's Han's view of the galaxy and what makes it go round. That's what he wants. And I really liked how that plays into that idea of what you were talking about, is that Han gives everybody a chance, but once their actions show who they are, then Han makes the decision, okay, do I just disregard this person or do I continue to trust them? And I love that because I feel like we have so much we can learn from Han, which is to say, allow people to show you by their actions who they are, and then whether or not they're worth your time.
Yes, exactly. And also, that even extends to the way he views ships, because one of the interesting things, of course, in Force Awakens is Han has lost possession of the Millennium Falcon, which we all know is his true love and joy, and he shows up with another freighter. And in this book, at the end, the Kaldanas show up with this beat-up old husk of a freighter that looks disgusting, but Han has an internal monologue while he's standing in there where he's like, I could show this the proper respect it deserves. He is all about function and all about, he doesn't care how it looks. He cares about how it works, and so that speaks even more to how he addresses people. He doesn't care about the outer appearances. If it can do what it needs to do, or if the person can do what they say they're going to do, then that's all he cares about. And like you said, with the freedom, that's all he cares about. He doesn't care about power. He doesn't care about leverage. He just cares about getting out there.
Well, and it just brings to mind, I mean, just having watched A New Hope, it's so true when Han's like, she might not look like much, but she's got it where it counts. I've made a lot of special modifications myself. Han is very proud of the fact that, yes, the Falcon, when you look at her on the outside, when Leia's like, you came in that? You're a lot braver than I thought. And he's like, nice. But he knows what the Falcon is capable of. And he knows, obviously, she holds L3 now.
Yeah.
But, after Solo. But there's other things. And so, yes, I feel like, Han's philosophy of life is don't judge something by its outward appearance. Don't judge a book by its cover.
Right.
Han's very being is about that. But once he opens up that book and sees what's inside, he may just chuck it away because you may not be worth his time. And I think, I really like that. I think it's really smart.
Yeah, but then you see as a counterpoint, Kira, she looks at somebody and what's inside and those sorts of things, but it's about how it can benefit her. And so you see, I think that Carson does a great job of priming the pump, as it were, of showing why she would be able to turn her back on Han in Solo. Again, we're in full spoiler mode and everything, so that the movie's going to get spoiled as well, I guess. But We already did that on a previous episode of the 602 Club, so there you go. But like the fact that what she's looking for is she's taken in by the decadence of the engineer's ship. She's taken, and I love the fact that it was a Nubian vessel because that's a callback to the prequels in and of itself. But the fact that she
Nubian,
but the fact that she, is looking at all of these things and the good life and all of that stuff. But through the entire book, it's about what somebody can do for her to further her goal. How can this thing further her goal? And we can see also her being enamored with the power that the engineer has, with the sway, and we can see that seed already in place in a very logical fashion for how she can be seduced by Crimson Dawn.
Yeah, I think the thing that Carson is able to do here that, then the movie was able to do so well is nuance.
Mm-hmm.
Kira is such a nuanced character because as much as the money and the power and the fancy clothes and the great ship and the idea of freedom from anyone else appeal to her, she also sees the way that the engineer treats people, which is that she treats them as what she calls assets. She calls people assets. And once they are no longer useful to her, Kira understands that she will, discard them. And because of her relationship with Han, and I think you would say his known to Sol, the Rhodian that they run around with throughout the entire book, they rub off on her, this friendship that they have, where you get the sense that she would have a very hard time, and she won't here. She will not give them up. She has the opportunity to go off with the engineer, but she chooses to stay with her friends because she realizes they probably have a better chance of survival if she's there.
Yes, and I think that there's you can see where if Han had stayed a constant in her life, that she would have turned out differently. And it's, I always think I think of that saying, to the world you may be just one person, but to one person you are the world. And I see that with her and Han very clearly in this, that they could have worked so well together. And I think that her life with Han, if she had not been nabbed at the spaceport on Corellia in Solo, would have been different. She winds up with Crimson Dawn, and I think that this book provides a very beautiful hint at how difficult it was for her to run across Han again. She had walked away. It was over. And then he shows up, and it's got to be difficult for her because she has, in 3 years spent the one person who was really left showing her the way of not treating people as just tools to be used is removed, and she winds up with the Crimson Dawn, where the entire organization is through the idea of people are tools that can be used. And so I think that is another place where the book is really successful in adding that shading to the character. And as for I pronounce it Sulo, the Rhodian, I really think Ray Carson does a great job of portraying how difficult a relationship with a brother can be sometimes. That your brother can irritate you, can drive you nuts, but you don't hate him. You can just be maybe a little disappointed that you guys aren't on the same wavelength.
Yeah, no, I liked that a lot as well. I thought it added some fun because I thought this book would just be about Kira and Han, but having that third person there really impacts both Han and Kira.
Yeah.
I loved the way in which he kind of informs how they are going to be for the rest of their life. And part of that came down to just who he was. And part of that really comes down to his thought process, and his ideas about the world, his worldview. I thought that was really nice to see them and Ray Carson add something like that to this book, because it gives us a glimpse of a completely different side of life, because he wasn't born into this life. His parents die, and, they were a well-off family from Coruscant who had moved here because their dad got a job. His dad dies, and then his brother blows all their savings, on a street race,
Right.
on a speeder, and he ends up having to work for the White Worms just to make it. And so I just, again, you're getting a whole other side, and he, I really like that. One more thing I wanted to say about Kira before I forget, honestly, which is, I also thought it was very fascinating to see how she's much more of a planner. She's much more of a person who kind of goes by the rules, by the book. I was putting in the notes the idea that she's a lot like Hermione from the Harry Potter series, where she's somebody who likes to study things, who likes to understand things, but she also has this sense of playing by these rules that Han realizes all of those rules in the life that he's in are kind of meant to be broken. As long as you provide people what they want, you can break the rules. I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, what's funny, and this is, read into this what you will, something that I really enjoyed was that I saw a little bit of my relationship with my own wife in the relationship between Han and Kira, in this sense that my wife, like Kira, is very, very much about planning and, seeing the long game and looking out. And I would classify myself much more as the crisis manager, where I don't necessarily think down the road, but plans break. And so it really is a situation in my own life where she'll plan, till she's blue in the face, and then we go somewhere, oh no, and they said it was going to be clear, but it's raining or something like that, and I will literally look at her and say, hold on, and go over and get the ponchos, and it's all about how you operate in the flow, and I think that is one of the things, it speaks to something that you and I talked about over on Aggressive Negotiations. This is why I think Kira is such a good fit for Han. This is why I think Kira and Han, it's so tragic that they didn't end up together, because they are literally two halves of the same coin, where she is that one side, she's, like you said, she's the planner. She looks down the road, and Han is the one where when everything goes sideways, chill out, I got this, I'll figure it out, and I can think on my feet. I love that about them, and I love the chemistry that's built in this book between them.
Yes. Oh, I absolutely agree with you. And part of that I thought was so interesting because, Kira is somebody who, look, Han understands he needs a person. He needs somebody to be his person. And what Kira sees is more of this idea of she wants to be with people, but in the context of a group, like the White Worms or like a Crimson Dawn later on. She feels much more comfortable in an organization than just with one person or a couple of people, right? And I think that's really interesting because it's almost as if that group gives her some sort of comfort level that she doesn't have otherwise. She likes the structure. She likes the rules about it, Whereas Han he wants to be able to just be copacetic with one person that, will follow him around the galaxy, basically.
Or not even follow, just somebody who can work with him, who can...
Right, yes, yeah.
Who's willing to do the same thing, which is, go around, find out what works. And it's really, in a sense, really beautiful because Kira may not wind up being that person, but the fact that Han winds up with somebody who is that, it's the importance of that person in your life. It doesn't necessarily need, and there's very much a thread throughout this that you don't necessarily need a romantic relationship to define who you are and those sorts of things. And, all due applause for that sort of, thread put out there. But at the same time, it is at the idea that going alone isn't necessarily going to be what works. That you do need something around you, someone with you who gets you, who understands you, who can take care of those things that you miss. So somebody who's got your back.
Well, and one of the things that I think is really interesting there too, because this kind of fascinates me. The engineer tells Kira that money is freedom. And the question I was asking myself then, but is that true, especially when your freedom comes at the expense of others, which usually then ends up affecting you down the road, right? Mm-hmm. And it kind of brought me all the way back to the Phantom Menace, like where, Obi-Wan's like, but you're in a symbiont circle.
Right.
What happens to one, it will affect the other. And so this idea, especially during the time of the Empire and the Dark Times, is that everybody is out for themselves at the expense of others, and it's this perpetual motion that the Emperor is keeping in line with people doing that, which keeps him in power then, which is what I thought was so fascinating then about, with Solo and Enfys Nest, where she talks about at the very end how Crimson Dawn and the five syndicates are doing these things in league with the Empire, that it's part and parcel of the same thing. And so, but I just thought this is such an interesting message, because Han specifically rejects that. He will not take his freedom at the expense of others.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful, awesome, incredible message to see in the world in which we live today. Like, when we talked about, the idea, and we've talked many times on Aggressive Negotiations, this whole idea of why George created Star Wars, which is to teach these kind of classic moral lessons. And that is, I think, one of the most important moral lessons, and I feel that so strongly here in Most Wanted, and I think it really helps bring that out and accentuate it even more when you watch Solo now in light of this. And it's just this expansion. Oh, gosh, I'm sorry, I'm just getting kind of like jazzed up, but I feel like Ray Carson really did this movie a solid in such a beautiful way by helping to just accentuate those themes.
Yeah, and I think that she definitely understands in an important and fundamental way the universe that was created, and and also the idea of the not just the corruption angle of it, or the fact that the Emperor benefits from the fact that everybody's fighting among each other for little pieces of the pie, as opposed to suddenly realizing that the head is rotten, sort of thing.
Yep.
But also the fact that Star Wars has a very environmental message embedded throughout it. And that is one of the things that she very much picks up on, because it's in the movie Solo, the reversal of expectations about what Corellia was like was wonderful to me. I loved it. And it really spoke to, in the bit of Corellia that we were on, of the dangers of industrialization and the downsides of those things that are left unchecked, and bad practices. You get all of that just in the intro of Solo, but here it's specifically addressed about how easy it is as well, because when they go to the good part of town, it's manicured lawns and estates, and they can't see what's going on. It's only the people that live in the despoiled parts of Corellia that understand what's happening in terms of the environment, and the dumping into the oceans, and the dumping into the rivers, and the smell, and all of the sewage that goes on. And I think that's a great thing. And then Carson also brings in the fact that the nationalization of industry has been used as a means to foster further corruption. And that is very much in the DNA of what was set up back in 77. I mean, the whole thing with Biggs, his conversation with Luke, if anybody hasn't seen it, the conversation with Luke, the world building that goes on in terms of how the galaxy works from the original film is fascinating. And this book finds its spiritual, it is a spiritual heir to that very fundamental aspect of the series.
One of the things I think that you're mentioning here is this idea of how Carson does the world building, and I think it's so strong. But one of the things that I love about it is how, like you said, and it started with how they decided to do Corellia with the solo films. And I'm right now reading for the first time A.C. Crispin's solo trilogy. And yes, Corellia is a very different place there. It's a place you'd want to actually visit. This Corellia is not. And I think that kind of reversal of what fans thought from maybe an EU source, but changing it in a way that makes complete sense, so that when you see it in the film and when you read it here, you get why they're going the way they are. In the same way I felt like the Clone Wars did, when they would change certain things, certain story type elements, like for the Mandalorians and that kind of stuff, where there was a very specific idea for why George did that. And so I see this in that same vein, and I think it's wonderful. I love your calling out the environmental message, because I was thinking about that too, just the way that Corellia has basically it almost seems like the worst form of capitalism in a lot of ways before the Empire came and then nationalized things and made it even worse through just rampant. I mean, corruption is everywhere now. It just feels like the title for Crawl for episode 3, corruption is everywhere,
right?
Instead of war is everywhere. And the other part about this too is that I really like, we had kind of, I think, discussed this a little bit, and I know I've discussed it with other people. Like, they mentioned the silos in the film.
Yes.
And getting a further piece of what that's like, that basically it's like the White Worms, but like 20 times worse than that, was really hard to kind of like, because when you start to think through that, you're like, oh man, I don't even know. I don't even want to imagine that, honestly.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I found very intriguing, was the fact that Kira built her hideout where a tree was. This one hardscrabble tree that refused to let go of life. And I find that also an interesting echo. I don't know whether it was conscious or subconscious. An interesting echo of the tree in The Last Jedi, but also the fact that we got that story about Luke going and getting the two trees, and I forget the comic's name.
The Shattered Empire.
Empire, where Luke going and getting the trees.
Yeah.
And Yoda has the magic tree. So you see, again, that's that seed of nature, but also trees always figure very big into it. And of course, Endor is full of trees and those sorts of things. There, in a sense, there's a very Tolkien feel to things with the reverence that trees are given. And it's and to see it repeated here, I think makes it feel even more a part of the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I really like that because I thought that was just a nice touch, and then too, because she then kind of hollowed out the outside and pulled that dirt to the outside, so people didn't suspect there was really anything there other than a mound. And just the way it was done, it was almost like their little like nature preserve, but in a like the dingy nature preserve, know, like there's something somewhat natural about where they are that connects them together, and and in some ways, like those roots go deep, and I think maybe that's what the Carson is going for. Those roots go deep, and the roots for her and Han, this will, transport us into what will happen in Solo, and that they will not be able to let go of those roots that they have. And that in the end, that the choice that Kira makes is somewhat based on the fact that, she made the same choice for Han at the beginning of Solo, which was to tell him to go, to do what she needed to do to make sure that he has the life that they both wanted. And so, gosh, we could probably talk more about that, but a couple of different things I thought was interesting. The EU is famous for the Empire being xenophobic, and pretty much just human based, especially as the Empire grabbed more hold. But I thought it was really interesting that the Kaldana Syndicate is basically that. They are a bunch of xenophobic humans who are trying to control, black markets in different areas like this. And I thought that was a nice touch, and it just called back to something that is very familiar, again, from like the A.C. Crispin novels, where she's talking about the Empire, and even the reason that Han's out of the Empire and the Academy, because he saved Chewie, because they were going to kill him.
Yeah, there is there's a thread there that's very much worth examining, and it is that, to put it as delicately as possible, Hitler didn't exist in a vacuum, right? For the Empire to be xenophobic, it would need the people that constituted it to be so as well. And I think that there's also very interesting that it's not just humans in the Kaldana Syndicate, that also the droid Gotra is, Tool says, Tool's been Han's quote-unquote friend. Han cultivated this relationship with Tool, and Tool says flat out, if we got to kill some humans to make this happen, it's cool. And that, that in and of itself reveals how cutthroat everybody is, where they are, people go tribal at a certain aspect, and that just reinforces the idea that Palpatine would encourage that. Because if people have gone tribal, if the Kaldana Syndicate hates aliens, and the droid Gotra hates humans, and the humans hate everybody, and the Rhodians are all, it really demonstrates how fostering division creates a lot of problems and benefits people who want that division out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've been thinking about this too, just in terms of the larger scope of the galaxy and Palpatine, that has to feed the dark side of the Force.
Sure. Yeah. Makes perfect sense.
So, yeah, absolutely. And I liked both of these groups because, again, they felt very much like something that I would have seen in the EU. And so I felt like I liked that callback. To kind of bring some of those things forward. But I also felt like, the droid Gotra, or the Gotra, was really well done, because it obviously kind of connects a little bit with L3 and her goal. And yet, of course, the way that she goes about this is not to, she's not trying to kill human beings. She just wants to have droids have more rights, to have more freedom. So it's a very different, it's almost like L3 is kind of the, Martin Luther King Jr. to Droid Gotra's Malcolm X,
Although it is always important to point out that Malcolm X recanted of the more radical stuff by the end.
Yes, this is true.
And, was a little bit more Martin Luther King Jr. about it. So all that to say, if you haven't read the autobiography of Malcolm X, go out and do that. I think that there's a lot of potential here, because one of the things I was excited about with Solo was the evolution, and Rogue One as well, is the evolution of how we're all thinking about artificial intelligence and how we're going to relate to it as we consider it more and more of an inevitability. And I think that Carson does a great job in this book of addressing that as well and being very thought-provoking. And I came out of this book saying to myself, this is a thread I want more people to pull on with Star Wars. I really want this to become a thing, a sideline. I'd even entertain a series of books or even a standalone movie about this idea of droids who have had enough of being, servants and want to become something more and be regarded as their own individual beings. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that gets all the way back to Blade Runner. That gets back to, all of these terrific science fiction,
yes.
Even Data in Star Trek. What is it going to take for you to consider this separate entity as a true being and not just as a machine?
Right. Well, and what was fascinating to me too is that the way that it kind of connects. Again, I'm going to reference Harry Potter, but it kind of reflects the whole house elf thing.
Sure,
that Hermione really gets into, and you know how so many house elves, they love their job, they love their masters, they're not mistreated, that kind of thing, and so they serve well. And you see that played out in Star Wars with the droids who are treated well, like R2-D2 or K2SO or BB-8, where they are treated as people, basically, Or I might say this: they're treated like pets, like beloved pets. And I mean, heck, my mother-in-law treats her pets better than some humans. So, it's that kind of thing. And whereas you get the other droids who are mistreated and are treated like just junk, and used to fight each other, like we saw in Solo and for entertainment and that kind of stuff,
right?
Which again, very much Brian Daley from Star's End. So I think the thing that I would like to see, though, in Star Wars is for them to do this the Star Wars way and not go specifically to sci-fi either way, in the sense, like, I don't want to start having the Data discussion necessarily in Star Wars. I want Star Wars to have its own unique take on, like, droids, then kind of going... Does that make sense at all?
It does. But at the same time, it would be a very quote-unquote Star Wars thing for it to go back to the original base root questions that you would see in older sci-fi when they first started postulating the ideas. I mean, go back to Lige Bailey with Isaac Asimov's series. You can do that, and there is a sense of there's nothing new under the sun, but where I agree with you is that there's a real opportunity here for Star Wars to be unique about it. And I think that Solo found a way to be unique about it. I think that Ray Carson found a way to be unique about it in this book, where she approached it, and I thought that it was a very great reveal at the end to find out the level of the Gotra's involvement and the surprise Han felt at the fact that Tool said, yeah, if you all died, whatever, it's cool. We're just trying to get our calls done. And Han to be like, oh, I thought we were friends. Okay. Like that sort of thing. And sort of realize that maybe it was for the best that the Droid Gotra didn't come out on top.
Oh, yeah. I loved that because... what Carson was so skilled at was helping you feel the way Han feels about things in the book. Again, much like you kind of feel like when you read Harry Potter, you're on Harry's side until somebody explains to you later on why you shouldn't be, basically, or shouldn't see it the way he does. And she does the same thing here with the droids.
Yes.
And the Gotra. And I thought, wow, what a great switch, because she leaves you feeling so much of this book that you're on their side.
Yeah.
Just like Han is. And so until she switches and you're like, oh, crap, no, we don't want them to have it either. Like, it's great.
But it serves to support Han's character, that he's not thinking down the road. You could see Kira wondering, what is their angle? What do they want?
Yes.
Whereas Han is simply willing to accept Tool at face value and say, hey, you're cool, and go along with it. And then they would have wound up in a pretty terrible situation if he had just gone along with that. And I think that there's also very interesting the thread of don't make the presumption, because I think there is a very dangerous presumption that people would say, oh, well, when the singularity or whatever happens, we seem to go polar opposites here, where we either think it's going to be Skynet or we're going to think it's going to be Data. Whereas I think Carson presents a very much more realistic view of, no, they'll probably be much more human than we want to realize, and that carries a lot of baggage with it that is not clearly good or bad in either circumstance. It depends on how you're looking at it.
That's a great point, because, again, these droids learn from their masters, right?
Yep.
What they do.
Yep.
And they pick up those really bad habits. And in many ways, the way that people who raise kids start to see their kids doing the things that they do that they wish they didn't, like it's very much a part of that. So I like that a lot. One of the things that I wanted to go back to, because I thought this was interesting, we talked about Kira and Han and their worldviews, but I thought it was interesting that Sulo has a very different worldview, and that he has a limited knowledge of what the Force is and what the Jedi were from his time on Coruscant.
Yeah.
And I thought that this was a nice juxtaposition to how Han and Kira think about things, which is kind of a very practical or pragmatic view. Kira is the rationalist, Han's the pragmatist, and Sulo seems to be the more spiritualist about things. And I really liked that this little tiny bit in here, because we don't get a lot of that kind of thing. Obviously, we really don't get any of that in Solo. But to kind of see Han's early interaction with this idea of what this is was interesting. And also kind of, I thought too, it shows how the Empire had really cracked down on these kind of ideas and made these things basically just myths that people may or may not have ever really heard about.
Right. And even the engineer says, I knew a few Jedi, and Han says, oh, wow, they must have really, given the Empire what for? And she says, no, not really. They're all dead. And Han, that winds up just supporting his idea that, well, this isn't really something to pay attention to, is it? And I think that one of the things that some fans need to come to terms with is that this is, in fact, a galaxy where magic happens, and you have to accept the fact that there's going to be mention of it. It's not going to be something where everybody has completely ignored it or rejected it. There will be any decent idea, if it gets out into the public, will find a way to live. And I think that Sulo's interaction with, his limited interaction with the Force and his acceptance of it as something worthy of paying attention to is, I think it's just a very, for lack of a better term, realistic way to approach things in terms of building this world.
Well, and I think it kind of supports something that I thought a lot about. And John, we've been planning to do, and we keep having to move it around for different reasons, but we will do an aggressive negotiations on this of why Force users who are in tune with the light side of the Force are so important, why spirituality in itself is important in the Star Wars galaxy. I think this book kind of hints at that idea of that without these things, the galaxy devolves into the worst version of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that both Kira and Han have this experience with this idea of the Force and that there is possibly, maybe something else out there, but there's nobody to show them the way. There's nobody to show them anything different until, of course, Han runs into Luke and Ben years down the road. And so,
yeah.
And then we get to the point where it's so beautiful in The Force Awakens where he says, I once thought it was a bunch of, tricks and nonsense, but it's true. All of it, the Force, the Jedi, and it's like, it's such a, like that little seed in this book plays out so well then in The Force Awakens.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say really took away a little bit for me about the journey of Han's character, or even Kira's, in this book was I would not have sent them to space. Because they go off to meet the engineer, and the engineer's on a ship, and they see hyperspace, and they see all those sorts of things. And one of the things that I preferred to read into Solo was that Han had always dreamed of being a pilot, had always dreamed of going through the galaxy, and there's that beautiful, beautiful moment in the film where he sits down in the cockpit of the Falcon and sees it go to light speed, and he has this beatific smile on his face as if a lifelong dream has been realized. And I just preferred the read that Han had never gone to hyperspace before that moment, that it was an oh wow moment.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I would have kept them planet side or had the engineer somewhere on Corellia that maybe you could get to orbit, but I wouldn't have sent them into hyperspace at the very least, because I think that's such an important moment for Han and Solo sitting in the Falcon's cockpit when it goes to light speed. But to flip that around, I like the fact that they give more information about his dad in this book, and his dad sitting there. And it's a very classic sort of story trope to have the parent relay to the child, I'm doing this, and this sucks, but you can do better, and I want you to do better than I'm doing right now.
Yeah, I like that too. I don't remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I felt like in the book, when they're in hyperspace, that Han and the rest of the kids are in their rooms and they're asleep.
Right.
And that so they don't actually see what hyperspace looks like, do they? They only see what space looks like.
I don't think that they see hyperspace,
Okay.
But...
So that read for you could still be there. That's the first time he's seen a ship enter hyperspace like that from the cockpit.
Right. The first time he's actually seen the effect of the stars.
Right,
but,
right. But I get what you're saying.
Right.
I completely understand, and I actually had the same reaction. I was like, "Ooh, okay." I mean, I can go with it. I get it. And I do feel like there's a part of it that also helps a little bit for those two, where they've had the experience of being away, and so it does kind of kick into high gear their desire to get out of there.
Sure.
So I feel like there's some help, but I completely agree with you that there's also a part of me that I don't know. It's maybe more. It's more like a 60-40,
Yeah.
where it's like, yeah. So, well, I mean, gosh, I honestly think that there's so much more that we could talk about. But as much as we have talked, I think we really digged into. I think we've really dug into some of the real meat of this story, which gosh, again, we talked at the very beginning about this being a YA book. Just go back and listen to all the things that we dove into because of this book.
Yeah.
Thematically and even just thematically for the Star Wars galaxy that this got into. So John, if you had to, put a good old Goodreads rating on this, I'll give you half stars as well.
Huh.
That Goodreads doesn't. Where would you put this one, you think?
I still don't get why it doesn't, but
I don't either.
Goodreads had boxed me in, and I was going to give it 3.5 stars. So, like right now, as I speak, it's at 3 because it's really 3.5. But to your point, sitting here talking about this and going through this, I'm going to give this a solid 4 with a hearty recommendation that if you want to read a good, well-written, enriching Star Wars story that works well with the film that it's supposed to be a companion piece to, I recommend that you go pick up Most Wanted. I think you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I came away from this book getting exactly what I wanted out of it, which was to know more about Han and Kira. We didn't even talk about the fact that they're not even in a relationship in this book.
Mm-hmm.
It's only at the end of the book where they've kind of begun to form the type of relationship, the depth of relationship that they will have in the film.
Right.
Where it started to slowly turn romantic, but there isn't really any of that much in the book. And I felt like Carson does such a great job of taking them from being characters who kind of like see each other as adversaries,
right,
to seeing each other as people, but even more importantly, somebody that the other cares about and would, sacrifice for, because they both sacrifice for each other in this book. And I think that's really neat that she puts them through an experience that draws them together and makes them see the worth and the value of the other person, being a part of their life and to trust them. So, for me, I'm going to say this book is 4.5 out of 5 Grotas. Because, Tool ended up kind of like half a Grota for a while. So, but no, I really do. I think this is so worth your time to read. I think it does a great job of expanding your knowledge of the characters and the film, and it will add to your enjoyment of watching the film as you hopefully go see it back in the theater, or, of course, when it comes out on, 4K, Blu-ray, digital, awesome, hyperspace edition. So
with a nifty cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I just love getting to talk Star Wars with you, John, and I'm glad that this brought us back together, as it so often does when they release such a fantastic book like this. But I want to thank Ken Tripp and Davis Grayson for supporting the show through Patreon. They're associate producers here, and they have been for years on the 602 Club. Now, go over to patreon.com/TrekFM, and you can see how you can support the network and make sure all of the shows keep coming to you each and every week. It's a big process to try and put a network this big together each and every week with all the shows we've got coming to you at the quality we've got coming to you. And if you do want that to continue, go to patreon.com/TrekFM, see how you can become part of our team. Every little bit helps. We've got some great contribution levels that you can give out as well to get certain perks too, because we love to give back to you even more. But again, patreon.com/TrekFM. John Mills is always welcome back in the 602 Club. He has his plaque here on this stool. Nobody else can touch it. It's his butt print. But John, when you're not here in the 602 Club, where can everybody else find you?
Well, you can find me out there on the internet as Kessel Junkie. I usually spend most of my time on Twitter, on all of the social networks. You can also find me over in the ether, floating around, co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig, and you can find me over on the nerdparty.com, co-hosting Great Shot Kid with Mike Schindler, who should, his name should be no stranger to those who are fans of Trek FM, where we look at the inner workings of film and the behind-the-scenes stuff, and, have a friendly debate or two about that. And then, of course, the aforementioned co-hosting with you, Matthew Rushing, over on the Nerd Party, Aggressive Negotiations, a special kind of Star Wars podcast, which we do weekly and is a great joy for both of us.
It is one of the things I look forward to every week the most. So, yes, it is a joy to do that show with you. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network, where I'm doing Owl Post with Dre Kaufman, talking about the Harry Potter universe, one chapter at a time, one book at a time. We are in the middle of the Goblet of Fire, so I hope that you will check that out. You can also find me here on Trek FM Network doing The Orb with Chris Jones, talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then last but not least, you can find me doing a show called Cinema Stories with my pal Courtney as we talk about films through the lens of faith. We actually did talk about Solo, and I will give you a hint coming up. We are going to be talking about the Harry Potter series through the lens of faith soon. So make sure you check that out.
Awesome.
Yeah, but all that left to say, thank you so much for joining us, and may the Force be with you.